Welcome to City Connection. It's Monday, January 13, 2025. I'm your host, Allison Donahue. Brought to you by the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, this live TV program offers the community the chance to hear from and ask questions directly to our local city officials. Like our guest today, newly sworn-in Mayor David LaGrand and Lindsey Reames, the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. For our longtime fans of City Connection, you might notice that things look a little different in the GRTV studio. That's because in the 2025 season, we're changing things up a bit, now offering news updates from around the city at the top of the show before going into a topical conversation with the mayor and our guest. No worries, you still will have a chance to ask questions directly to our guests during the second half of our show by sending them to cityconnection@grcmc.org, or you can head over to the Rapidian's Instagram, go to our Instagram story, and submit your question there. Let's get into what's new here in Grand Rapids. The first City Commission meeting of the new year is happening this Tuesday, January 14, at 2 p.m. These meetings are open to the public and are live streamed on the city's YouTube page. If you're watching this live, that's tomorrow afternoon. We also have exciting news for the future of the Grand River. The Michigan Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as EGLE, granted a permit last month for the Grand River Restoration Project. This means the city can begin bidding for the construction contract this winter, with in-river construction expected to start in summer 2025. The river restoration plan includes bringing back the rapids, removal of the 4 low-head dams, and installation of natural rocks and boulders, structures and habitat boulders to help restore the river's historical flow and river bottom diversity. Winter weather is here, if you haven't noticed. Haven't looked outside yet today. And the city wants to remind everyone about sidewalk clearing requirements. Don't forget, if you're a property owner, you are responsible for keeping sidewalks clear of snow and ice to ensure pedestrians can travel safely. In its 6th year, the largest winter festival in the U.S., World of Winter, hosted here in Grand Rapids, is back with art installations, interactive exhibits, and live performances and events. Check out the festival schedule and map of the installations at worldofwintergr.com. It was announced last week that President Biden awarded Grand Rapids $1.5 million to expand electric vehicle charging ports, adding an estimated 32 new charging ports across the city. This funding comes from the Federal Highway Administration to support zero-emission refueling infrastructure programs. And in more infrastructure news, Grand Rapids will receive more than $25 million in federal funding for major improvements to the East Beltline and US 131. These projects aim to enhance safety and connectivity and address decades of inequities caused by past infrastructure decisions, improve accessibility, and reconnect communities, according to the grant awarded to the Michigan Infrastructure Office. That's it for city updates. When we come back from the break, we'll be joined by Grand Rapids Mayor David LaGrand and Lindsey Reames, Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission, to talk about something that's on a lot of folks' minds: housing in Grand Rapids.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push their creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
Welcome back to City Connection. I'm your host, Allison Donahue, joined here by Mayor David LaGrand. Thank you so much for being a part of our program. It's been a long history of having the mayor join us here on City Connection, so it means a lot that with this new administration, we're keeping the tradition going.
That's great.
For folks who might not have gotten the opportunity to meet you or hear from you yet, can you give a little introduction to our viewers?
Sure. So I've lived in Grand Rapids since I got out of law school. I actually went to college here too, but came back after law school and worked as a prosecutor in town in the Kent County Prosecutor's Office for a number of years, and then went out in private practice. So one of my big identities is I'm a lawyer. Another big identity is along the way, I started some businesses with friends. So I started Four Friends Coffee House a long time ago on Monroe Mall, started Wealthy Street Bakery and the Hall Street Bakery, and I'm now involved in the in Long Road Distillers on the west side here. So I've had a lot of business involvement, but also in about 2005, I started really getting involved in public service. And so I was on City Commission first, then I served on school board, and then I was for 7 years state representative, and now I am mayor. So I've done a lot of public service stuff. So I've been in Lansing, I've been local, I've been in the schools. So I'm excited to roll up my sleeves and start working on all the things that need to happen in Grand Rapids. I sometimes tell people couple really good things. One is Grand Rapids is in great shape by a lot of metrics compared to a lot of other cities. We're really doing well. So some of our problems are kind of nice problems to have, and one of the things we're going to talk about is we need a lot more housing. Well, we need a lot more housing because a lot of people want to move here, which is great. But the other thing that I often point out about Grand Rapids is I think our visions have been great on a lot of key things that I really care about and I think our citizens care about. I'm hoping we can just move a little faster on some of that stuff. So accelerating the scope of the work we're doing is important, but I think we've been going in the right direction. And so, former Mayor Bliss and I are good friends and have a lot of the same visions for things, and former Mayor Hartwell and I are good friends and have a lot of the same visions. So a lot of what I hope to do is continuity of the good work that's been done before. So,
have you felt like you've been able to hit the ground running since the start of the year?
Absolutely. I mean, I actually really started thinking about city policy probably a year and a half ago now in anticipation of this. So I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of meeting with people. Actually, I don't know, even before the election, I went out and met with a couple really good urban thinkers in Boston because they were really good urban thinkers, and I wanted to meet them and pick their brains and talk about city policy stuff. So I had a great meeting with an econ professor at Harvard about some of the housing stuff I'm hoping we can do. Had a great meeting with another urbanist about cycling and pedestrian safety, which is another big thing I hope to work on. So, yeah, I've been building the vision for a long time. It's also true that I'm really happy to be working with a bunch of great, talented colleagues, and really working hard at building a culture of communication and trust on the commission, because it's really important if we're all going to go in the same direction, that we share information, that we share ideas, that we're deeply collaborative. So we have to listen to the community always, but we also have to listen to each other. So.
And you're doing that in kind of a unique way with these Monday meetings with the public.
Yeah. So
yeah.
If I can jump into that. So one of the things I love about your show is you actually have viewers who actually send in questions, and we can actually talk about them, right? Mm-hmm. We all know, those of us who have been to city commission meetings, that can be a little frustrating, that format, because you go in and you can say whatever you want for 3 minutes. You can talk about, the history of Alabama if you feel like it for 3 minutes, but there's a shot clock up front, and the commission traditionally doesn't talk with you, so it's not a conversation, and then you just have to leave, and the next person gets to come up and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And that's not bad, but it's really not a conversation. And so my belief is, if we're going to do policy well in this town, we need to be willing to have conversations, and deep conversations, about the policy things we all care about in public, where don't pretend you know all the answers and then go, right, start with a conversation where we say, like, okay, so here's a big issue, here are some possible things, here are some ideas. Does anybody else have any good ideas? And so we're calling those Mayor's Mondays, and we're actually doing the first one tonight with Secretary of State Benson is going to be coming to town, and we're going to just have a community town hall forum. But we're going to do these every single month, and we're going to do them over and over and over again. And so we're hoping every month to have a different focus. So in January, we're going to be focusing on housing. Next month, we'll hope to focus the conversation around justice and policing issues. The month after that, we'll hope to focus on infrastructure investment and neighborhood development. And then we'll go back to housing, and we'll go back to justice, and we'll go back. So we'll just sort of, every quarter, the same issue will pop up, because all of these are complex issues that human beings have been struggling with ever since we created civilization, right? Like the issues, justice is something the Greeks were talking about 2,000 years ago.
You can't solve it in one coffee hour?
Exactly, and we got to get out of the solve mentality. And that's, it's something Mayor Bliss used to say, which I appreciated, was, we've got to try to get better at things. So we can absolutely hope to do better on delivering justice to the community today than we did yesterday. And we're coming up on, there's going to be a trial, for example, in the Patrick Loyola case, and that's going to be a point where the community's going to ask, so that tragedy, how can we be confident that's not going to happen again? Well, it's really important to have a community conversation about, like, ways we can do things better. And for all that we've got good people in the city thinking about those issues, we've also got people in the community who are passionate about justice issues, and we need to pull them into the conversation. And because government is something we all own, right? The only reason we elect people is because it's too hard to do direct democracy. But your voice should be just as powerful as my voice, and your next door neighbor's voice should be just as powerful as our voices. If we really believe in democracy, then everybody should have a right to have their voice in the conversation. And so I'm excited to try to do better ways to draw people in and engage people and make people feel like they own, because you can't expect people to feel like they own the results if they don't own the building that goes into the results. Yeah. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so the first one is tonight with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson from 5:30 to 7,
Correct.
I believe.
It's at 301 Fuller, if I've got my memory right. And we're going to have a website. We've got the domain name. It's just going to be mayorsmondays.com, and we're going to have we're hoping to go to the same place every first Monday, and that'll be in the first ward, just first Monday, first ward, second Monday, second ward, third Monday, third ward. And right now we've got permission to use some schools, so we're going to be at, I believe it's, I don't want to get this wrong, I know we're going to be well, no, I don't want to give the schools out. I don't want to get it wrong.
So soon, check out Mayor's Mondays, but if you're interested in the meantime,
Right, you can
get a
come
hold.
tonight,
Yeah.
and the website will be live soon, but we're going to hope to go again and again and again. So you don't have to come to the first one, because we're not going to stop talking about these issues. We're not, I promise, we are not going to stop talking about housing for the whole 4, maybe 8 years that I'm mayor. We're not going to stop talking about justice issues for years, and we're not going to stop talking about neighborhood development and how to make our neighborhoods better, stronger, how to do, renewable energy is a whole other exciting topic. I'm really passionate about moving us into a renewable energy space where the citizens can really have some ownership in how we produce power, and that's a whole other exciting conversation. But again, I don't want to be dogmatic at the beginning. I want to be like, here are some possibilities. Do we want to go do this? Do we not want to go do this? Because it's always going to be we, right? It can't be I, and it can't be the government. It's got to be we, the community. Like, what we want to do is what we should go do.
Well, let's kick off this conversation that you'll have tonight about housing.
Yeah.
Give the Secretary of State some ideas to get her gears turning.
Yeah.
Housing is a big issue here in Grand Rapids, and has been, but it feels like it's top of everyone's minds right now as we're paying rent, looking to buy houses. And in 2023, we found Housing Next, an organization here in Grand Rapids, found that Grand Rapids is about 14,000 dwelling units short of where it needs to be by 2027.
Yeah.
What else do we know about housing needs here in Grand Rapids?
Well, first of all, that's kind of a shocking number. And one of the things it means is our speed of delivering the housing units is not nearly equal to the demand. And I think it's important to put this in context. This is a continent-wide problem. And so if you want to get geeky about it, one of the central problems in this space is that how we deliver housing really hasn't gotten a lot more efficient really in the last almost 100 years. So we're still, for example, going out onto a work site, digging a hole in the ground, banging nails into 2x4s. And there are, for example, in Sweden, a lot of the work that they're doing in housing is modular. They're building things in factories and then bringing them to job sites, which can really speed things up. So how we can do housing, our computers are way better than they were 5 years ago. Computers didn't exist 40 years ago. Our phones are better. Our cars are better. Everything is markedly better and made markedly more efficiently. Housing is the weird exception. So there's lots of data on this, and it's a sticky problem that I don't think as Grand Rapids we're going to be able to solve the housing industry on our own. So there's some things we're going to be able to do. Some things are sort of headwinds in this space for anybody trying to look at these issues. The other sad statistic that really, really grieves me and worries me is a couple weeks ago, statistics came out that year over year, the unhoused population in the United States of America has gone up 18%. So we're not getting better on this. We are not close to having addressed the fact that people really are sleeping under bridges. People really are living in their cars. And we have to acknowledge, sometimes people talk about a housing continuum. For every person sleeping under a bridge, there's maybe 10 people who are couch surfing. And for every 10 people who are couch surfing, there are probably for every one person who's couch surfing, there's probably another 10 people who are almost on the verge of eviction, really aren't quite sure they're going to have next month's rent in time. So it's a pyramid, and we see the top of the pyramid, but the base of that pyramid is really problematic too. So all of these pieces talk to each other. And so we're not going to find some ordinance we can pass Tuesday in City Hall to fix all of this, right? We're going to have to look at the drivers of those expenses, the real needs, the real ways we can help some of those populations who have higher needs. We're also going to have to have conversations about devoting resources. There is no free lunch. If we actually believe that housing is a human need and a human right, then we're going to have to put some resources into the problem. So now, where the resources come from, this is another huge piece of the puzzle. So I hope to be able to explore some stable funding possibilities. And I'm already in conversations with our friends in state government about this. I think that it's really important to me that we not, for example, in Grand Rapids, treat renters like they're second-class citizens. It's easy for conversations in this space to be driven by people who act as though home ownership is the norm or should be the norm, when, as a matter of fact, a lot of our population is renters, and a lot of them, that may be the best choice for them. So I don't like dynamics where we start stigmatizing renters or acting like they have any less stake in our community than people who own homes. The good fortune of being able to afford a home and the decision to buy a home shouldn't give you different implicit or explicit rights than renting and living in the city as a renter.
Over the last year or so, there have been some new things introduced in the city to address the housing crisis we're facing. Some of these zoning changes, these zoning ordinances, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what those changes were, how you see them now as the new mayor, and how our viewers can take advantage of maybe some of those things they haven't heard of yet.
Yeah, so some changes we've made are, actually, a number of them have been good. There are a number of next steps that I think that we're primed to take, that we should take. And so I hope to have that conversation with my colleagues and with the community, and I hope we can continue to make progress. But then there are also some things that simply saying you can do X doesn't necessarily mean people will do X. And then if they don't, you have to take a minute to think, well, why is nobody taking advantage of this? So the top in my mind on that list is, if you talk about these things all the time, you start using acronyms. So people inside of this conversation often talk about ADUs. What ADU means is an accessory dwelling unit. So to put that really simply, what that means is something on a property where there's already a dwelling unit, to have a second one on the same property. Now, the simplest example of that would be a garage. So the nice thing about garages is you already know they're fairly close to the water and sewer because they're by a house. You already know that they've got 4 walls and a roof, and a foundation, and so you're usually you're a good way down the path towards having that being housing. Now, there are lots of really exciting characteristics of an ADU. One of them is that they're probably going to be owned by somebody who lives in the community, because we're a lot of the time potentially talking about somebody doing this behind their own home. Well, what that means is they're probably going to be a really good landlord compared to, say, BlackRock Capital, right? Like if some faceless corporation owns an apartment building, they're not going to be as sensitive to loud parties as you are if you're renting to somebody in your backyard, right? So there are natural sort of neighborhood compliance and good behavior things that come along from having your landlords really close to your renters, and that's really healthy. So ADUs give you that opportunity. They also let people, invest in and find income streams that aren't simply earning income, and that's a real path to prosperity potentially for people, so that's exciting to think about. The other thing that ADUs give us is more density, and density frankly gets you a lot of good things. It gets you more walkable neighborhoods. Unfortunately, historically, a lot of cities have sort of taken a field of dream approach to retail. Like, if I declare that this whole area should be retail, then it will magically become stores which will succeed. Well, stores don't succeed until they have enough customers. So the best thinking now is, if you really want to have successful retail, if you want restaurants in your neighborhood and bookstores and coffee houses and all the things I want in my neighborhood, well, you need a certain number of people around those things, and then those things will happen. And so having more people live in your neighborhood means you're going to get more coffee houses because you've got a customer base. And so the problem is we haven't had very many people apply to make ADUs happen yet. And so I want to crack open a conversation about, like, okay, well, why haven't they? Are there ways we can facilitate that? Are there ways we can stimulate that? Are there breaks we can give people who do that? Or do they simply need, sometimes you don't do something unless you can envision it. And so I want to help people visualize, like, what would it be like to have a rental unit in my backyard?
Yeah, there's no current incentive for anyone to do it.
No.
Okay.
And frankly, there's some perils we haven't addressed. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do is have a conversation with our city assessor about, like, okay, so if someone puts an ADU in their backyard, what happens to their property tax status? And we want to be able to make sure that people aren't doing something that winds up tripling their property taxes, because then they're going to wish they hadn't done it, right? So all of those kinds of conversations have to happen, but the potential there is really exciting. Now the trick is to make sure that we can build a path for people that they will choose to take. And if the path isn't there, or they don't know if the path is invisible, then I'm not going to take an invisible path. But if there are barriers in the way, we need to figure out what those barriers are. So it's broadly permitted, but is it happening? Well, if it's not happening, then you've got to figure out, then you got a facilitation problem. So.
As a new mayor, I'm guessing you're always looking to other cities to see how things are done well or not done well. Do you have inspiration from another city that you'd like to see brought here to Grand Rapids to address our housing crisis?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is, well, one of the things that, there are a couple, I'll give you a couple ideas. One is, I keep saying this over and over again because I think it's really important that people understand the cost of housing. If you're talking about the need to build more units, well, those units, how much it costs to rent them, is going to directly relate to how much it costs to build them. So anything we can do to drive down the cost of construction is going to drive down the cost of renting or of owning. So one thing to remember is time is money. So if I'm a developer and I buy a plot of land and it takes me 3 years to put something up on there that's going to produce, that's going to give me some return on the money I invested, that's inherently a lot more expensive than if I can get something and I buy a plot of land and a year later I can have something there. So then the renters, the tenants in that place just have to pay more rent, because everything, time is money, and anybody who invests anywhere in the stock market, in housing, whatever, naturally wants a return on their money. I mean, if you buy a house and you get a mortgage, the bank wants a certain percentage of return on the mortgage they gave you. Similarly, if you build an apartment building and you get financing, the bank wants a certain percentage return. So to meet those numbers, the lower your construction numbers are, the lower your rent numbers have to be. So speeding up timelines is really one of the things we can address. And one of the ideas there, to circle back to what other cities are doing, I know one of the first cities to do this was South Bend. South Bend actually went out and said, we're going to get an architect to draw us some pre-approved, some models for different housing options, which would then say are pre-approved. So if you do this, then you're good to go. Go start building. So they've done that for duplexes, they've done it for quads, they've done it for single family houses. And so if you don't want to hire an architect, well, first of all, it saves you the price of an architect potentially. Second of all, it saves you time, because you don't have to go to planning and say, can I do this? Because you know you can do this because the city's pre-approved it. So speeding up the timelines for construction, that's something that South Bend already did. There are, for example, in the Flint area and the Lansing area, they've done really good work with land banks, and that work has actually helped them facilitate affordability. So those, I'm really excited. Grand Rapids we're in the process of building a land bank that I hope is going to be able to do really good work in this space. That's, I think, maybe our single most important opportunity in the space of affordability is getting a land bank that works, is well funded, structured the right way, and we're working on that now. We're actually going to be discussing this tomorrow at the City Commission. So the land bank conversation is one that has to happen.
I hate to stop you.
Stop?
We do have to go into a break.
It's not going to be the last time you cut me off.
It's okay. We can pick this conversation up, and I know we have questions coming from viewers about housing, so we'll keep talking about housing. But it's time for us to take a break now. When we return, we'll be answering questions from viewers like you. To take part in the conversation, feel free to send us an email to cityconnection@grcmc.org or head over to the Rapidian's Instagram story.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push the creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
Welcome back to City Connection. It's January 13, 2025, and we are joined by Mayor David LaGrand and Lindsey Reames, the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. In this portion of the program, we'll be taking questions from viewers. Before we get into questions, I'd like to introduce Lindsey. Thank you so much for being a part of our program. You are here with the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. For viewers who are unfamiliar with the work that you do, what is the GRHC?
Yes, thank you. So the Grand Rapids Housing Commission is a public body corporate enabled by state statute. We serve low-income families who need affordable housing. We own and manage about 4,300 units, consisting of 1,000 units in properties, and then the rest of the units in other sorts of affordable housing subsidies, mostly through the federal Housing Choice Voucher Program.
Great, yeah. So what kind of work do you do to actually get residents into safe and affordable housing here in Grand Rapids?
Yeah, so as you guys have already talked about, housing is at a state, not just in Grand Rapids or Michigan, but across the country, almost at a crisis level. And so we have waiting lists at all of our properties as well. Our Housing Choice Voucher Program is closed, except for a couple programs that cater to very special populations. So besides the regular Housing Choice Voucher Program, we also have programs that target specifically, are targeted specifically to veterans or foster youth or homeless individuals. So we also have a facility for homeless families with children. And so there is an application process. There is a waiting list. We work as exponentially as we can to get units filled as quickly as we can when they do become vacant. We are in a difficult place right now from a federal funding perspective. The costs that were talked about today have skyrocketed across the country for market rates, which impact the programs. The higher the cost, the less families you can serve. So we are waiting still for our federal budget for this year. So we're sort of in a holding pattern for being able to house any new families with programs till we know where we are and what will be available.
It's difficult. Well, thank you. Thank you for that insight. I won't pepper you with any more questions. I'll have the public do that. This first question comes from Ivan. Ivan asks, I believe this would be for you, Mayor, but would you support a rent stabilization ordinance if the state changes state law to allow it? You can answer two as well if you would like.
So the first answer is this is a long. I'm sorry, but I'm going to tend to say these things are complicated.
That's
so there are this. I would welcome the conversation. Is the simple answer. The fact of the matter is that rent stabilization programs, if they're done wrong, can have weird unintended consequences. And so, for example, if you craft them so that landlords have no incentive to do maintenance, they can not succeed in doing what they're supposed to do. If you wind up in a situation where you're sort of picking winners and losers out on the housing market, that's not really great either. Now that being said, from a personal perspective, your viewers are going to get used to this, but for me, like transparency and disclosure from elected officials is a very big issue. It's something I spent years working on. So I have disclosed all of my finances on my website, so this shouldn't be news to anybody who wants to know, but I own a 3-unit rental building, and I also own some commercial properties. And a while ago, I had this realization, my perfect commercial tenant stays forever. Well, why wouldn't I want to let my residential tenants have continuity, right? So a world in which I own a house and then I know that no one's going to kick me out at the end of the year as long as I, have my bank stuff in order. But a renter, the longest horizon a renter gets is 12 months, and then they have no idea. Like, if my neighborhood gets cool, maybe the rent goes up 30%, or my landlord turns out to not like my hair color or whatever. Like, a 12-month window on ordering your life is really weird. So if we want renters to be good citizens and part of our community, and like join the local PTA, like invest in their community school, whatever, it's only fair to let those renters have like a reasonable, decent timeline on being able to continue in the house they're in, right? So when I had this moment, I had this realization that like that was true, I just revised all of my leases. So all my leases now, I give my tenants 5-year right to renew, and I say, look, the most I'm going to increase your rent is 3%. Now, I maybe could have done inflation, but I'd rather buffer people against bad inflation events. But the reason I did that is because I want my tenants to be able to plan and invest in staying in the house, treating the apartment well because they like it, because they know they're going to have it next year, but also be better citizens of their block, of the community in general. So I would love to have a conversation about how we can give renters more stability, more skin in the game in being part of the community. Those are all great, and that gets back to my earlier foundational point, which is I don't think renters are second-class citizens. I don't want them treated, I want them to have exactly the same opportunities to be part of our community that people who own homes do. And so anything we can do that will facilitate that, I'm happy to engage in. Now, the other part of the question is, if the state legislature, I do not see that as a reasonable, I do not think there's a realistic possibility that at least in the next 2 years, we're going to see any legislation coming out of the state legislature as it's currently constituted. I do not think that is a live conversation. There's lots of things that are near and dear to my heart that I do not think are going to be live conversations in Lansing for the next session. So I think the trick, if I'm going to be an effective advocate for our city in Lansing, is to think about what's possible, what's on the horizon that's likely, and where we can lean in and have a voice on things that are going to happen. I mean, if we could decide to have a state bill to cure cancer, but like that doesn't mean we can cure cancer. And we could, I personally think it's really, really it's obvious to me that any citizen, any resident of the state of Michigan should be allowed to have a driver's license, because that relates to like their ability to drive a car well, and we want people to be better citizens if everyone can get driver's licenses. The initiative for that failed, and I don't think it's likely to come back up in this session. Mm-hmm. That's a really important issue for our community. I really think it's a great idea, but I don't expect that conversation is even going to be possible in the next couple of years.
We can't wait for Lansing.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have another question from Colin. How will you balance the need for urban forest space with resolving GR's housing crisis?
Well, for one thing, there are lots of places we can put trees where you can't put houses. I think that one of the things that we've tended to do, for example, is not have enough trees along roadways, and there's a whole other conversation there, but I want to generally slow cars down in Grand Rapids to sub-lethal speeds. And so one of the other things that I've been talking about a lot is, if a pedestrian gets hit by a car going 35 miles an hour, there's about a 90% fatality rate. 25 miles an hour is about a 90% survival rate. So slowing that 10% is a big, big deal. So tragically, I don't know if you saw, a cyclist was killed yesterday, killed by somebody coming off an off-ramp on the highway. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to build a city in which cyclists and pedestrians don't get killed. Right now, we have more people, I think, in the new year, we have more traffic fatalities at this point than we do murders in the city. And they're preventable by better design. Sorry to get off track, but trees are great, trees are good. It's Rosalind's legacy. I'm happy to lean into it. I had a great conversation with somebody about, individual neighborhoods can sort of sponsor programs that really help trees thrive, and they can lean into watering and collaborative stuff to make sure that if you plant a tree and it dies, then you can feel good about having planted it. But if it's not there in 5 years, Ottawa Hills, for example, is doing a great job of actually making sure the trees they have continue to live. But at the end of the day, the most important component to me in Grand Rapids is the need for housing human beings. And we right now have people living under bridges. We have people living in cars. That is a humanitarian crisis. And I like trees, but even vegetarians eat plants. I think that human rights are the most important thing in our community. I think that animal rights are second, and I think that plants are third, and they're a pretty distant third. So for me, the most important thing is that we deal with the humans in our community and treat them with humanity and dignity and respect, and that everybody gets treated with. I think if we believe in democracy, what we're talking about is a radical commitment that everybody deserves the same dignity and the same voice in our community, and that's what I get up in the morning worrying about. Trees are good, don't get me wrong, but what I get up in the morning worrying about is whether we're treating the human beings in our community with the dignity they deserve, and that runs through justice, it runs through housing, it runs through how our neighborhoods operate and work, but we're in the human business. We're in the human flourishing business. And I have 3 dogs. I like dogs too, but fundamentally, we're about people.
All right. I appreciate that answer. I think we might have time for one more question. Why is the city, this one comes from Chelsea, why is the city not forcing companies who are building high-rises to have more affordable housing? This is a big question that I'm bringing right before break.
Sure. No. So it's a big question. So a couple answers to that. One is when you say forcing, we live in a free market economy. You may not like that, but that's the economy we live in. So when you say forcing companies, that's very strong language. So I don't generally want to force anybody to do anything. I don't want to force you to have to choose what you wear in the morning. I don't want to force people to. Right, you have to have a compelling reason when you start talking about mandating things. But the other thing to know is the data is really clear on this. 2 things. First of all, we need housing across all sectors. So the 15,000 units you were talking about, we need market rate housing and we need affordable housing. So that's the first thing. The second is really good data shows if you build more market rate housing, in other words, housing that's just goes for whatever price people want, who are willing to pay for it. If you build more of that, everything in your community actually gets more affordable because there's a domino effect. So the biggest driver, a huge driver, I don't want to say the biggest driver, there's lots of drivers, but one of the big drivers of affordability is we just don't have enough housing. And so the example I use is, imagine if there was one car in the studio and 3 of us wanted a car. Well, if the government gave us all $1,000, that wouldn't produce another car. That would just mean we'd all be able to bid higher on the one car. Like, the really key thing is, if we all want a car, we need 3 cars. And so if we need more housing, talking about like forcing company X, Y, or Z to do A, B, or C, and the other part of this conversation is, we need to think cost per unit and bang per buck. So if we can accomplish 10 times as much affordable housing in one segment of town than we can somewhere else, it's okay to have more expensive stuff one place as long as you can go provide affordable housing somewhere else. So you don't want to take your eye off the ball. It's absolutely important that we have affordable housing, but how we get there is not, we want to maximize our results, maximize the efforts, and that means we have to acknowledge complexity, and we also have to remember that, like, yeah, it's actually good to have market rate housing. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the enemy of affordable housing at all. The two are actually moving in the same direction as long as we can get more. Now, we don't want to stop building affordable housing, of course, right? And that's why, your work is really, really important. But it's a piece of the puzzle, right? It's not an either or. It's a both and.
Finding the balance.
Yep.
Well, it is now time for us to take another break. Thank you so much for your answers here. But when we return, we'll be taking more questions from the public. Welcome back to City Connection. We're joined by Mayor David LaGrand and Lindsey Reames, the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission, taking questions from the public. Getting back to questions, we have one coming in here from Jay. Jay asks, what are the different ways that the government can influence private developments? Whoever wants to take this one away.
Okay, I mean, we talked during the break, folks, like I'm answering all these questions and I don't want to hog it all. But one of the first things the government can do is, zoning and regulatory, the regulatory environment. If you want to build anything, you got to get through the government to do it. And so one of the ways that we can influence things is by making it easier or harder to do this or that. And so, for example, minimum lot size requirements. Well, if you have minimum lot size requirements, you're all of a sudden putting a big constraint on what it's possible to build. If you have setback requirements, my 3-unit apartment really would be better as a 4-unit. And it's got a ground floor, 1-bedroom apartment. The layout's, it's really big sprawling unit. And I was like, hey, it would be way better if it was 2 smaller 1-bedroom units. What I ran into almost immediately was, no, your house, your footprint to grass ratio isn't sufficient to let you have a 4th unit in there. And I'm like, really? Like that? I think we probably are going to be okay with oxygen supply in Grand Rapids, even if I put another unit in there. But that was what I got. And then the other thing I got was, oh, your parking ratio is wrong. Well, again, what you're kind of doing is you're treating renters like they're children. Like, what do you think the odds are that like someone's going to rent an apartment and not notice what their parking options are, right? Like, these are grown-ups. And so like maybe you could let them choose, and maybe they don't want to have a car, and maybe they don't need a parking lot, and maybe they're going to walk to work, maybe they're going to bike to work, maybe they're going to take Ubers everywhere, right? So especially younger renters are like way more comfortable thinking like, I can live without a car. And in big cities, people make that decision all the time. So regulatory stuff is the number one thing. We can also incentivize. And so, for example, I live in Heritage Hill. There are government incentives for me to do work on my historic house as long as I fill out the right paperwork. And as a matter of fact, I got paperwork in my car for some stuff I want to do to my house, but the government has a reward system for that. Well, okay, do you really want to reward people who live in historic neighborhoods for taking care of their house, but you don't want to reward people who live in non-historic neighborhoods? Like, we could at the city level, we could maybe redress some of that disparity. It's not, I don't know that it's going to get addressed at the state level anytime soon. Maybe we'll get addressed at the state level too. Maybe that conversation about ADUs, maybe we want to incentivize them. So incentives work, regulatory things work, but those are really the 2 tools in your toolbox, right? Either regulate and discourage and constrain, or incentivize and subsidize. And so all kinds of housing projects get subsidies. Now, the other thing, I'm sorry, but one of the things that really, really frustrates me is that we basically tax homeowners at half the rate we tax renters with property tax, because the homeowner property tax exemption means that, because property tax for a landlord just gets passed through to the renter. That's just what happens. It's a cost, like the cost of gas or the cost of electricity. So the homestead property tax exemption sounds great, but what it means is, if you're lucky enough to be a homeowner, you pay $4,000 a year, but that same house next door, if it were rented out, the property taxes are $8,000 a year, and the renters have to pick up that slack. So I find it really frustrating that we double tax renters, and that's how Michigan's structured. Now, there is a new program called Payment in Lieu of Taxes, and that it's called PILOT, that's the acronym, and that PILOT program actually gives us the ability to reverse some of those disparities in projects. So I'm excited to talk about rolling that out in Grand Rapids, because the more we can equalize the property tax burden between renters and homeowners, the happier I'm going to be. In fact, renters kind of get a double whammy, because homeowners tend to own bigger things, and they own them for longer, and their property taxes get suppressed over time too. So it's even worse than double.
You're getting me stressed out about tax season.
But at least it's true that renters now. The other thing your viewers should know is there is the possibility of it's called a homestead tax credit. It doesn't mean you own your home. renters, low-income renters, can get real money back from the state of Michigan if they fill out their taxes and they plug their rental costs into their income tax form. So that's a big thing that not a lot of people in the community know about. I was actually working in Lansing in a way to make that more clear to renters, because a very small percentage of renters take advantage of that state break.
Interesting. Good to know. The homestead tax credit.
Homestead property tax credit, I think, and it's on your form if you pull up your state income tax forms. But it has the word homestead in it, so I always thought that like meant he had to own a home.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Renters get the break too.
I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to bring in this one from Jesus. Jesus asks, since the housing crisis is getting bigger, is the Housing Commission expanding to meet the need? Lindsey.
Yeah, good question. So we are always looking to expand our portfolio, whether that means acquiring new units to extend their affordability period through investors who are getting out of the tax credit program, or there are other ways that we also can expand housing opportunities. Grand Rapids Housing Commission happens to be one of only 140 agencies across the country. There are 4,000 housing commissions or housing authorities across the country. So we're one of about 140 who is designated as a moving to work agency. What that allows is some additional flexibilities in waiving of regulations so that we can design programs that meet the needs of our particular community. Also taking advantage of all the flexibilities that we can around shared housing. So for example, we recently changed our policy so that vouchers can be used to rent bedrooms in homes. So you could have a 4-bedroom unit and you actually could have 4 vouchers that are able to find housing in that one, so being able to expand that way. We also have expanded of housing choice vouchers at mobile home parks. So, and for modular homes. And so just those sorts of opportunities where we can grow. We are also always looking for the opportunities whenever funding is available and new vouchers available, we always apply for those. We aren't always awarded, but we always apply. So we are always looking to see how we can better meet the need.
Great. Well, we are just at about time today. I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing your insight. Welcome to the office, Mayor. Looking forward to a good year of City Connection with you. And thank you so much, Lindsey, for your insight from the Housing Commission. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and sending in your questions. Don't forget, you can always watch rebroadcasts throughout the month of January on cable, GRTV's Channel 25, or through the GRTV YouTube page. See you next month, Grand Rapids.